working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Another interesting day on the COVID front. We have now reached 66 million, exceeded 66 million of us having contracted the COVID virus. That's 20%. 20% of the country has now been infected. This according to Johns Hopkins University. Conservatively, we've had, about 853,000 dead. I would argue that number is probably considerably higher, just like I would argue the number of people infected is going to be higher than the 66 million. But we're spiking again, and there's some of the voices out there going, I actually had someone email me this. We should have COVID parties. We should have Omicron parties. Kind of like when I was a kid, they used to have, mumps and measles parties where, if you chicken pox parties where you would bring all the kids together so they all get sick. And a lot of people, it was much better back in the old days. No, it wasn't. But to get to this magical place, and I was thinking about this today, to get to the magical place of herd immunity where we don't have to worry about it, killing, it's about 80% of the people having to get infected by it. So we've got 20% now, and we've only got, another how many more to go? And then how many more dead are we talking about? How much more? And this is one of those things where you go, at what point, do we stop being so ridiculous on this? It's quite remarkable. In fact, I had an incident today. In fact, where I'm in an environment, a medical environment, where a woman's insisted she's not, her chin was well protected. Let's just put it that way. Her chin well protected. But, the nose and mouth, not so much. And she's like, well, I have a mask. Isn't that enough? And you go, no, dum-dum, that is not enough. The idea is to use it properly. Use it properly. That's how we do that. That's how we do this. Now, some good news. After my wife goes and buys a ton of N95 masks, and thank you, dear, the Biden administration now plans to distribute millions of them for free. High quality N95 masks across the country through pharmacies and community sites. This evidently is going to happen on Wednesday. It's reported that there are something like 773 million N95 masks stored in the national stockpile. We've gotten them from about 12 manufacturers. So there are some good masks out there, and they are going to be free. So thank you for doing that now, Mr. President. Thank you. Now, ours are made in the U.S., and I would guarantee that Joe Biden had better. Had those better be made here in the U.S., and I believe they are. That simple. I'm now looking at this, though, and I'm going, of course, now they choose to do this. Should have done this a while ago. Should have happened a while ago, especially, a couple of days ago before my wife decided now would be a good time to go spend all that money. Yeah, thanks for that, dear. Also, evidently, some new some COVID tests are going to be available free at, I guess it's, covidtests.gov. I guess that went live today. They're a limited capacity at the moment, but I guess each residential address in the country is eligible for 4 tests. I guess all you have to do is go to covidtests.gov. Much like on the 3 o'clock in the morning shows, where they're hawking limited time, supplies are limited. Hurry, do it now. There you go, because they're saying that yes, supplies are limited, but more are on the way. Now, what's interesting to me, and again, this is stuff that if it were me, I would have done this months ago. This should have been now. Who knows where our supply numbers were? I'm not involved in that conversation. Who knew, what we were worried about for frontline? We didn't want to get caught in another moment like we did at the beginning during the last administration with the pants down, not having enough PPE for our emergency first responders. And look, the reality is, and this is where I give the CDC a little pass on the early, we shouldn't go run and get masks right now kind of thing, is because they were worried about, protecting the frontline people in hospitals and that stuff. And I kind of get it. But for me, immediately ramping this up and just handing them out, this idea that you got to go find your own masks, nonsense. We should have been getting good quality ones from the beginning, from the start. And now finally, we're going to get into that and the testing. This might help a little bit. But the weird thing is we're still in this divide where even if you're getting it for free, I still have people, no, we're not going to make me do anything. I'm an American, damn it. I can do whatever I want. And you go, how about, being decent? What happened there? Now, I've been getting hammered from the right wing. Virtually all of their media outlets are going, Joe Biden's ruined all this, and this is Joe Biden's pandemic, and Joe Biden, did this and didn't do that. He's horrible. The country's going in all the wrong directions. Like they do. Their hair's on fire because they need to raise money and they need to keep their base. They need to keep the base fed full of outrage candy because it is what they do very well. You have to give them credit. They do know how to rile the faithful, and telling them that this is all Joe Biden's fault gives them license then to basically go against anything the administration wants to do, like hand out masks. But I find it interesting. We're in this moment where now Republicans are kind of pivoting and completely attacking the administration. And I'll argue this has everything to do with the fact that, thank you, Senate. We don't seem to be getting anything done. It seems like a good time to attack. And if I'm them, I probably do too. This is why I'm trying to say, Democrats, get your stuff together. Just kind of saying. But yeah, there's a lot of this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts today. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you got a thought, question, comment on any of that. Now, good news today, little good news. The January 6th committee, they have issued subpoenas for the Trump Legal Brain Trust. The Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellison, Sidney Powell, and Boris Epstein, they have been subpoenaed for testimony and documents. Now, the chairman, Chairman Thompson, said the four individuals that were subpoenaed advanced unsupported theories about election fraud, pushed efforts to overturn the election results, and were in direct contact with the former president about attempts to stop the counting of the electoral votes. Meaning, some of these people were probably involved in that Eastman memo, and they should know. Now, I know they're all going to claim a client attorney privilege. I know that's going to come. I am kind of interested to see if there was actually a retainer paid, if Trump actually paid them for anything. Just kind of throwing it out there. Also today, the January 6th committee has subpoenaed and obtained records of phone numbers associated with the dumbest Trump child, Eric, and the other one's former wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle. Digging, getting a little bit deeper, more information. I'll tell you, I'm getting a little happier with the Department of Justice, getting a little bit happier with Benny Thompson and the committee, finally starting to get the ball moving. Wish it had been months ago. And as I said, I understand, yes, so please save the email, that there are two separate components here. There's the political, the committee, and that, and then there's the legal, the judicial side with the DOJ, and that they are much more deliberate, much slower, and that they need to be much slower. I think that is a good thing and a good way to go. But there's the difference. So that's where my mind goes. I'm excited that maybe we're going to start finally holding someone accountable, and that would be I think a pretty good thing if we could finally hold someone accountable for their actions and for the stuff that's gone on. Don't you? I mean, on a certain level, it just is. It is what it is. Let's go to the phone lines. We've got Kurt on line one. Kurt, how are we doing?
I'm doing good, Rick. How about yourself?
I can't complain. What's on your mind, brother?
I want to talk about the Senate and the freedom to vote. I get I've been getting maybe 10, 15 messages, emails, all the organizations wanting to call Kyrsten Sinema. And in the last month, I would say I probably got 200 of them.
Wow.
And my thing is I realize that's good, and I think we need to do that. And I think that the right wing has us focused on, to call Kyrsten Sinema, because they're good at doing the messaging for the Democrats. And we still have 280 some days to be able to vote. And we're not talking about the primary election. To me, the primary election is so important. And we can pick these candidates that stand for voting rights. And if we win, we don't necessarily lose the right to vote. And to me, I think this midterm, when they were telling us in 2020 that that's the most important election, I was thinking about 2022, because to me, this one is the most important. And I think we're getting too caught up into what's going on with the Senate, because there's so many other things, and it's ripping us apart. I mean, we're fighting so many things, and I think we're missing that moment.
No, there's a lot going on here. You're right. I'm in the hair on fire category over voting, because I see what a lot of these states are doing, and how they're already in the next rig mode on how they're going to block people from voting. How in some states that they're setting up a system to throw votes out. How they're setting up a system to possibly at the end of the election change. There's so much that's not being overseen, and my problem is there are so many of these states that are going to start doing some really, really tricky stuff that I fear we have a Florida, every election cycle going forward, and that to me is a problem. And also, they're doing a masterful job of what Democrats do well, getting people, to vote by mail and, the early voting stuff. They're doing a bunch of what they can do to make that more difficult. So that's my concern.
Right.
Now, I'm with you on the part that I don't think the voting thing's going to pass. We should be spending a lot more energy in the streets, mobilizing people to jump over those hurdles or knock through those hurdles. But, while we have a chance, I think calling Sinema is not a bad thing. I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think Manchin or Sinema is going to matter. And here in a second, probably talk about that. But I do think that we need to do more organizing in the street, Kurt. I think you're right on that.
Right. I spent 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I spent phone banking down in Texas for two candidates that are running. Because their primary, the primary starts on March 1st.
Right.
And there is so much confusion, Rick, because of the redistricting. And I was spending time explaining where to go. I don't live in Texas. I'm in Arizona. And I'm sitting here explaining their district, their new district. I had to pull up a map to just figure out. This was in, we were phone banking in Austin, and people are just so confused. And what really disturbed me, Rick, what really bothered me was, so I made 210 calls where I actually got a voice to pick up, and 130 of them, and this is in Democrat, this is Democrat and Independents, 130 people just hung up on me. They did not want to talk.
Yeah.
And the ones that I did get to talk, they were so angry. And I just sat there and let them, get it out. And I'm like, I understand.
No, good on you, man. That's a lot of phone banking, and good on you. If we could clone you, that would be a great thing. But Kurt, I appreciate the call and the thoughts, man. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So
good stuff,
so
brother.
Yeah, I just got a feeling there's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of hurdles to get over in this midterm.
No, we got a lot of work to do. Appreciate the call, Kurt. Thank you so much.
Do.
No, and look, at the end of the day, he's right. The anger level on every front is way up. And this is where, one of the things I learned in 2011 with the recall in Wisconsin, the same thing. The voters were just tired of being inundated, tired of being berated by, messaging from any side. They just wanted to live their lives for the most part. And while, people like me who, this is what I wake up in the morning to do, most people, they got lives. And they, politics, is a couple of weeks before election time. And this kind of in this moment where we're not getting anything done, that keeps them in a weird spot. Now I look at the fact today that Chuck Schumer, the majority leader for now, says that they're gonna look at changing the rules to go back to a talking filibuster. Something I believe they should have done all along. Now he says that the American people deserve to see where their senators, where they are on these bills, and he's going to go forward with a vote. Elizabeth Warren says, look, all 50 Democratic senators believe that, in voting rights and protecting the rights of voters, all of that stuff. They're just hung up on the procedure that gives Mitch McConnell a veto. And, well, here's what ended up happening. You ended up having Joe Manchin, who come out today and said, not changing his mind. He's not changing his mind on the filibuster. So screwed they most certainly are. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Moyers versus Peabody. The case grew out of the Colorado Labor Wars, a series of back-to-back strikes in 1903 and 1904 in the precious metals mines and ore mills. The Colorado National Guard meted out violent assaults, arrests, and deportations against strikers, often on orders from Colorado Governor James Peabody. The state militia routinely rounded up strikers and union leaders, detained them for weeks in bullpens, and ignored their habeas corpus petitions. Western Federation of Miners President Charles Moyer arrived in Telluride during a strike to find these repressive conditions. He signed a poster that read, "Is Colorado in America?" The poster included an image listing the many violations of basic democratic rights on the American flag. Moyer was arrested in March of 1904 for desecration of the American flag on the poster. He was detained on the grounds of military necessity, even after the courts ordered his release. His case traveled through the state and federal courts until the Supreme Court ruled. They held that the governor and officers of a state National Guard, acting in good faith and under authority of law, may imprison without probable cause a citizen of the United States in times of insurrection and deny that citizen the right of habeas corpus. The ruling radicalized the labor movement. Many concluded there could be no justice through the court system. A later case successfully challenged the ruling on the basis that the claims of insurrection were subject to judicial review. The ruling, however controversial, still stands today and was invoked after 9/11 in the 2004 ruling Hamdi versus Rumsfeld. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So I was watching this, I'm looking at this NBC article, and they're talking about how to deal with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and all of that. And it's one of those things that, just kind of remarkable to me that, this is how we have to hold them accountable. They're saying, look, there was a lawsuit filed last month in federal court. They're seeking monetary damages from two of these groups of Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and their senior members, the people who were linked to the January 6th, riot, insurrection, seditious conspiracy, however you're going to put that. But there they were. They're in the process of suing them, and I'm going, this is kind of a novel idea. The idea that we're just going to bankrupt them, put them out of business. And look, I guess it's something we've done in the past. You think of the Klan back in the 80s. So hey, and at this point, I'm of the mindset any way you can hold them accountable, you do. And as my son reminded me, we didn't get Al Capone for all of his crimes. Got him for tax evasion. Either way, still behind bars. And speaking of behind bars, I keep asking the question, why are not those folks in those 5 states, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, those places that put forth forged alternative electors, how come we don't have people in those states in prison? Because I got to think fraud, forgery, I got to think those are crimes. And here to share some thoughts on, are they crimes and are we going to see them being held accountable? I've asked our good friend Greg Palast to come talk with us. Greg Palast is an investigative reporter, author of How Trump Stole 2020 and tons of other books. The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, my favorite. He's also a New York Times bestseller. You can check out his stuff at gregpalast.com. Greg, thanks for taking some time for us.
Glad to be with you again, Rick.
So let's start right with the first part of this. I mean, look at in these 5 states where we now find out there were forged elector certificates sent to the National Archives. And why? I mean, why now? Why hasn't someone already been arrested? On the day they were sent, you had to know, somebody had to know they were illegal.
Well, blame the founding fathers creating these bunch of little bastards. Our problem is that we have a constitution with the 12th Amendment that says that, if there's not enough electors, then it goes to the House, one state, one vote. West Virginia gets the same vote as California. And so, of course, it's an invitation to fraud because you don't have to do much to overturn the will of the people. We don't have popular democracy in the United States, and that was deliberate. John Quincy Adams wrote about how democracy was the most dangerous form of government he can imagine. That's why they wrote the Constitution, to overcome the democracy that was promised in the Declaration of Independence. So it goes way back. But yeah, look, where is our Justice Department in general? I mean, obviously, it's not the Injustice Department that we had under the Trump, under Bill Barr. But still, it's almost like they're taking a very long nap here. There's a lot of people that ought to be in prison. For example, I mean, you take the instigators of the January 6th insurrection, like Ali Alexander. How come he's walking around? He was just at the Trump rally. How come he's not behind bars? You had cops who died. You had people who died in that insurrection. It wasn't a matter of disorderly conduct. It was a matter of murder. How come those people aren't in prison right now? I mean, not for these small BS charges, but for the real stuff. People
No,
died.
I'm right there with you. And I keep asking now, what's taking so long? And I know I've had a bunch of people say, no, Rick, the wheels of justice grind slowly. We want the Department of Justice, to be, get their ducks in a row and do all that. And I do agree with that. But there's the other side of it. A lot of this stuff should have been laid out last year. A lot of this stuff should have been, because the narrative, in my view, has been already changed. It was just another day at the Capitol. It was just another day of visitors
People were
walking between
protesting.
the
It was the
ropes.
people's house. They were allowed in, blah, blah, blah. The cops invited them in. Look, let me tell you something. I told you on your program before, my team with Zach D. Roberts, we got inside the organizations that planned the January 6 events, including, by the way, the women that held the rally, the Women for America First. They informed Mark Meadows, chief of staff. They informed Donald Trump personally that it would be illegal to march on the Capitol. And that's why they didn't let Alex Jones on the stage or Ollie Alexander's crony, because they knew that they were going to say march to the Capitol. But then a guy named Donald Trump said march to the Capitol, knowing it was illegal to do so. It was a crime. It wasn't a crime breaking into the Capitol. I mean, that's certainly a crime. But it would not have happened if it weren't for an illegal march. That march was illegal. Trump was told, don't do it. There's no monitors. There's no permit. We've promised in writing to the Parks Department, to the Capitol Police. So a crime was committed, and the instigators of a crime are usually responsible for the criminal activities. We just had a kid who was a guy who was a minor executed because he was in a getaway car where someone was killed at a 7-Eleven robbery. He was a kid who was just running the getaway car. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. Yeah, he shouldn't have been involved in a robbery, but he's responsible. He's responsible. And he died in the electric chair. Well, what about Mr. Trump? What about Agent Orange? He did something which led to people dying. It used to be murder. I used to work for the Justice Department when it was a Justice Department before it became an Injustice Department.
Yeah,
Yes, I agree with you. I'm not happy about it.
Now, I'm curious your thoughts on today's subpoenas. You got the Trump Legal Brain Trust who have been subpoenaed. Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, because when they say it's not his lawyers, these are people advising him on how to overturn elections. So, again, they were trying to use their concept is to use something called the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, which is horrific enough. If you think that the Electoral College is bad, imagine one state, one vote. And that's what they're aiming for. Understand, it's not just what happened on January 6th. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen in January 6th of 2025. Because if they can pull this off, see, they weren't prepared to pull it off, but they could do it where they challenge the electors in half a dozen states. Then it goes to a 12th Amendment vote. And remember, the second article of the Constitution, which I'm sure you just read recently, I know that you always read it before dinner.
Yep.
The second article of the Constitution, not the amendment, not the one about your gun, but the second article says that legislatures, not the voters, but legislators choose the electors who pick the president. And I don't like it, maybe you don't like it, but that's what they're aiming to do again. So what the January 6th group has to do is, number one, Trump was directly involved in instigating actions which led to people dying. That's one. You indict people for that. That's what the Justice Department is supposed to be doing. The second is look out for January 6, 2025. That's the date when they have to certify the next election for the presidency. And this time, they're not going to be confused. They're not going to have Mike Pence standing in the way. They're going to roll in, and especially if you have McConnell as a majority leader, you're going to roll in and see them challenge states that, let's say Biden runs again and wins Georgia by 12,000 votes and Arizona by 14,000. You're going to see those challenges this time. And this time, every Republican will vote to challenge those electors because they saw what happened. Think about it, Rick. What happened to all those Republicans who voted to impeach Trump? Out. What happened to all those electors who said that they wouldn't challenge the election? They're out, or they're being primaried into oblivion. So it will not happen again. This time the Republicans will be loaded for bear to challenge the outcomes of elections. So we got to be prepared for that.
And this is where I think, You know, in the last segment, I had a caller, you know, saying, we're not going to get the voting rights, and we shouldn't be spending all this time. We should be dealing at other things. And there's part of me that agrees with that. But I'm on this voting reform is kind of a hair on fire moment. If we lose this ability right now to oversee what goes on in these states that are already rigging the elections, none of that stuff that you're talking about is going to matter, because voting isn't going to matter.
Okay, let me give you a couple. Let's get down to practicalities on this. You know, I've been going to a state called Georgia for 9 years, and I've been watching this. I went down because Martin Luther King III, he just led the march yesterday. Martin Luther King III said, Greg, you know that Georgia's a blue state. If they'd let us vote, could you investigate? And I did. And every time I find a new trick, they've got another one. And the latest one is, I've mentioned before, is this thing called voter vigilantes. We haven't had that since 1946 in Georgia. What this is, under the law that was passed last year in Georgia, any voter can challenge any number of other voters' right to vote. Supposedly if they have information that they're not legal voters.
Yeah.
If you go to gregpalast.com, you can see me confront one GOP official. In fact, I think she's now vice chair of the GOP in Georgia. Pam Reardon is her name. She personally has challenged the right to vote of 30,000 Georgians in her county. 30,000. Yeah. I said, have you called these people? Well, no, I can't call 30,000 people. Have you met any of these people? No, I've never met any of these people. I said, how come you're challenging their right to vote? And that's the Georgia law. 30,000 challenges by one voter. In fact, and what they did, you know where that came from? And you have to know some history here. Gene Talmadge was the Ku Klux Klan leader who became governor of Georgia in 1946. And then remember, in 46, there were a lot of black voters in Georgia. And what he did was he passed out thousands of mimeograph forms and said, fill in the name of a Negro, except he didn't use the term Negro. Fill in the name of a Negro, and stop them from voting. And it worked, and that's how he became governor in 46. Now, Brian Kemp, running for re-election against Stacey Abrams, is now simply taking the Ku Klux Klan, handing out mimeo forms, and taking it electronic. They're now handing out thumb drives with names of people to challenge. Ready? 364,000 voters have been challenged in Georgia by private individuals, coordinated by the GOP in a group called True the Vote out of Texas. I'm trying to explain why we need to watch the vote and why we need this legislation. But without this legislation, we still have a Justice Department, which better get some jets on here. We really need them now. Now's the time, Merrick Garland. Now's the moment.
No, and I look at this to highlight your point. You know, they did this in Virginia back in 2020 as well, 2016 and 2020. I think it was the Voter Integrity Project. I love that.
Yes, the Voter Integrity Project. They challenged. They were the ones that pushed the interstate cross-check system in 2016, and what that meant was that in several states, where they said, if we knew that you voted in 2 states, we take away your vote. And I got a hold of the lists. I was the only journalist that said, give me those lists. And I found them. And what they said was voters voting in 2 different states, they were all named, it seemed oddly, Jose Garcia, Maria Rodriguez, John Black. You're getting the point. Helen Ho. These are not names I'm making up. These are literally the names on the list that they said were people voting twice, as opposed to maybe Jose Garcia. It may not be a common name for a Republican, but it's a common name for an American. But they knocked off these people's votes. These are the games that have been played, and just simple stuff. Rick, you know that when I was in Cobb County in 2020 in the runoff for this state for the U.S. Senate with Ossoff and Warnock, in Cobb County, which is Newt Gingrich's old county, it's big. It's the second biggest after Fulton and Atlanta. And there were 11 early polling stations. When Biden won in November, they closed 6 of the 11 for the runoff. All 6 voting stations, all 6 out of 11 that were closed, were in African American neighborhoods. They left open the white stations. We had people driving 20 miles, African Americans driving 20 miles to vote, and they still won. They couldn't stop them. And so that's the good news, Rick. You can't steal all the votes all the time, but we sure better be diligent. I'm going back down to Georgia right now on this because you know what? With or without that law, we have a lot of work to do.
No, we've got a lot of work to do. And I think it's important to understand all of these gimmicks that keep coming up time and time again. And I've been saying for a while, look, Republicans spend a lot of money on think tanks and on people dreaming up these horrible policies. And this, I remember saying at the beginning, last year in December when they were floating the idea of, we got to get the vote back to the House of Representatives. And they were floating all these ideas on how they were going to maneuver this. And I was saying, look, they've gamed this out in these think tanks. They've spent tons of money doing it. And lo and behold, we find out, hey, there's a memo, a 2-page memo on how to do this. There's a PowerPoint presentation. There's all of this documentation on how to do this stuff.
And I got labeled, when I said that I actually wrote an article that before and did interviews before the election in 2020 saying Trump could try to steal this election using the 12th Amendment, this challenge to electors of different states, and then having this Pence call a vote of the states in the House, one state, one vote, the 12th Amendment. You know that I was removed I was removed from YouTube. I was removed from Salon. Salon had actually nominated my work for the Pulitzer Prize, and then they removed me because they said it was conspiracy stuff to say that Trump would lose the 12th Amendment. And then we get the Eastman memo in which it explains to Trump, here's how you use the 12th Amendment. And that's why they were pressuring Pence to use the 12th Amendment. But the thing was they were trying to do it without all the senators and Congress people knowing about it. Now they're going to be in your face. They're going to be up front, and they're going to try to use it. Like this stuff. Yeah, it used to be considered conspiracy nut stuff to think that someone's trying to steal the election using a very odd part of the Constitution. But now I would expect it. There's going to be an absolute attempt, and we got to be ready for it.
Now, I've had people tell me I'm being hyperbolic, that the steal is already in, and that if we better start our own Stop the Steal movement, and it better be legislatively, and it better start with Democrats. Now, even though it doesn't look like Manchin or Sinema are coming around to it, something has to happen.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be in two places, the Justice Department and then at the state level. We're going to have to fight this out at state level. And by the way, even if we had the two voting rights bills passed, we'd still need to, you can have all the laws you want. After all, we do have the shell of a Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
We do have a 15th Amendment to the Constitution. The problem is that we need to organize at the street level. We also need to make sure that Republican Congress people in swing districts know they need to be asked, are you going to vote to overturn our vote in 2024? We need to get commitments.
Absolutely. We need to get commitments. We need to get people in the streets, all of that. We need to get people to go to gregpalast.com to find more information. We need, and we need you, Greg. I appreciate the time, man. As always, great stuff.
Thank you very much, Rick. See you at gregpalast.com.
There you go. Make sure you check that out, and we'll get links out on how you can check out Greg's fantastic books. Quick break, right back.
And this is Labor History in 2. Have you ever worn a union button or T-shirt to work? On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. Members of the Australian Tramways Association in Brisbane, Queensland, decided to put on their union badges at work. The men operated and maintained the city's public transport system. For months before the action, their manager, an American named Joseph Stillman Badger, had banned wearing the badges. He wanted to thwart the union from growing in numbers. Before noon that day, the workers gathered together and donned their union badges by affixing them to their watch chains. And for that, they were promptly suspended from their jobs. They were told they could return to work if they took off the badges. The workers refused. That night, 10,000 people gathered in the city's market square in a rally to support the workers. The next day, 25,000 workers walked off the job and marched through the streets. A general strike was called for January 30th. 43 unions supported the strike. The police violently attempted to disband the strikers on February 2nd, a day known in Australia as Black Friday. Perhaps the most remembered event in the strike occurred when the famous feminist Emma Miller stuck her hat pin into the rump of the police chief's horse. The horse reared and sent him tumbling to the ground. The strike wore on for 5 weeks before it faded. At the end of February, the tramway employees were officially granted the right to wear their badges. But the company refused to hire back striking workers. The events at Brisbane were an important stand for free speech and the right to form a union. A question for today is, how far would you be willing to go to show your union pride? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interesting story over at Bloomberg. And again, another one of those reasons why we need to reinvest in manufacturing domestically. We need to return to the ideals that I've been saying for the longest time of domestic production for domestic consumption. But Bloomberg reports China's zero-tolerance approach to COVID has idled Toyota Motor Company and Volkswagen AG factories in the past, a troubling sign for global car makers as Omicron variant begins to spread in the world's biggest auto production hub. Now, look, that's just cars. All I keep hearing from the right is, Joe Biden hasn't done enough on our supply chains. You know how we deal with our supply chain issues? We make things at home. That seems to be the way forward. Here to share some thoughts on, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this something we should be doing? I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is super great to be with you tonight.
So I'm looking at this statement by Bloomberg, and look, I know China has this zero-tolerance plan. They seem to be able to deal with the virus in a different way than we are. But ultimately, the ripple effect is we're not going to get the things that we need because we're reliant way too heavily on the Chinese and their manufacturing capacity. For me, it seems like the answer to this problem, bring it home.
You're absolutely right. And, we can bring a lot of manufacturing home. It takes policies. It takes intent. The biggest thing standing in our way right now is the big multinational companies that control most of this. They don't see it as in their interest to do this, even though they have these disruptions, they have increased shipping costs. They would still rather lean on a system that's built on the backs of exploited labor, a polluted environment, shipping all the way across the Pacific Ocean, and relying on the good graces of the Chinese government, than investing here in the United States, when for many of these companies, the U.S. system of education, of innovation, of patent protection, and our consumer market is what made them so powerful. And so it is. I don't know. I don't know why we can't lean a little more on these companies who have depended so much on public support, whether they like to admit it or not. And the fact is, unfortunately, you mentioned automobiles, but almost any complex piece of equipment that we have, whether it's an automobile or a computer or something else, has parts that are coming from China right now. And so if that part of the supply chain is disrupted, it impacts the entire, upstream, downstream, and what can get to consumers. And so the answer is we should be reshoring this. Now, I heard you set this up and saying Republicans have been criticizing Joe Biden for not dealing with this. Well, guess who got us into this problem over the last couple of decades?
Exactly.
It was, first of all, the free trade policies that were championed by Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and I will also candidly say by a lot of national Democrats as well, but overwhelmingly by Republicans in Congress. They were almost unanimous in their support for all of this stuff. And so, and deregulation and tax policies and everything else that made it easy to offshore jobs and take pressures off of multinational corporations. They expect Joe Biden to turn this around in a year during a pandemic, when it took 3 decades to take this stuff offshore. That's an unrealistic expectation. And I do think Biden has plans in place to help with some of this, and they include trade enforcement, investment in our own people, in our infrastructure, which will create jobs. I do think that we got to lean a little more on these companies to do the right thing. Say, look, if you believe in stakeholder capitalism, which you say you do, you say you care about our communities, about our workers, about all of that, you got to prove it.
Yeah.
You got to prove it. And so give American workers a chance. Too many of these companies are unwilling to do that, and we have to hold them to account.
Now, I find it interesting. Again, you have all these people saying it's all Joe Biden's fault and he hasn't fixed anything. He doesn't. You go, but as you said, this has been 3 decades in the making. And oh, by the way, what are you doing to help? I look at the situation we're in right now, and while I'm focused on Manchin and Sinema as being a problem, all 50 Republicans are steadfast against any movement or in dealing with almost any of this stuff. So where are the ideas from the other side to actually throw in and say, hey, we should be all doing this because we're all in the same boat?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, Rick, because there's a real dilemma in the Republican Party now. Because on trade policy, Trump started to pull apart. He didn't do it completely. He didn't do it perfectly. But he obviously had a different trade policy than prior Republican presidents, like Bush or either Bush or Reagan, for instance. And so, but the Republican money, the Chamber of Commerce, the big companies feel a different way about this. So they'd rather not talk about it at all and just blame Joe Biden, because they don't want to have to make a choice between their voting base now, which is very kind of Trumpy, right? And their money, which is not. And it creates a real dilemma for them. But they're unwilling, in many cases, to work with Biden on policies that would be helpful. There was virtually no support in the House of Representatives for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, even though that's something that will be helpful. And we'll see. We'll see if Pelosi gets support for Republicans on a bill on China and competition as well. That's expected to come in the near future. So we have a lot of work to do. But the way to do it is to work together rather than to point fingers at an administration that I believe is largely trying to find the solutions on this in the best way they can in this environment.
Now, I've got friends who say, well, Donald Trump was handling China. They made a deal. They were going to make China buy a bunch of our stuff. It was going to be great. They were going to buy more stuff, and it was a fresh start. We were going to have this great new way forward. How is that plan that Trump negotiated? How is that actually working out? I know there was a lot of good talking points or some amazing tweets. How's it actually worked for we, the working people of this country?
Yeah. Well, I will say, Rick, so it's 2 years old, this China deal that he had. And the intent was good, to try to reform trade policy with China. The deal itself and the execution of it were horrible. The deal was basically a purchase agreement. Like, hey, China, you're going to make me look good by buying some soybeans, by buying some corn, by buying some other stuff, and we'll declare a truce for a couple of years. So what ended up happening is that China did buy some stuff, but in many cases is 40, 50% behind their commitments. So they didn't hold on that end of the bargain. And the really tough issues that we have with China, like the fact that their government owns large swaths of its manufacturing capacity, particularly in industries like steel, automobiles, some of these others, left untouched. Currency left untouched. The outright theft of intellectual property still, it's addressed on paper in the agreement, but the reality is it's still an enormous problem. The fact that labor is exploited in China left untouched. In fact, it was Biden who signed this Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that would bar products coming from that region of China. And so the big issues here are still on the table, and they're going to be hard to solve, and everybody knows that. But I also think that it's unrealistic for Biden to try to change policy on China that's been in effect for more than 30 years when no other president has been able to do that or even come close. And Trump held up this deal as something that would help. But the truth is it's not. And our trade deficit is still super high. with China.
And the weird part of this is we're a divided country, and China knows this. And China has massive influence over messaging. And this is the part that's really frustrating to me, especially in this moment that, I think all of us agree there's a problem, but being as divided as we are, as ripped apart as we are, I don't know that there's a path forward. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Make sure you check that out. But, I'm looking at this and how divided we are, Scott, and I'm going, how can we have a cogent policy going forward if one side is rooting for the failure of the other? Look, when Trump was going to China and said, I'm going to make a deal, I was hoping for the best deal possible. I wanted him to bring jobs home. I wanted him to bring home, I wanted him to be able to do victory laps with a piece of paper going, look what I did. I was in favor of the tariffs, and now we hear people, the tariffs, they've caused inflation, and we got to do away with the tariffs. I'm going, no, last thing we want to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so when you get out to America, to towns like you live in, or towns where I grew up in Indiana, or where you're from in Ohio, Democrats and Republicans shed their party labels when it comes to an issue like China and trade. They all think it's been a rotten deal, and they want us to do something about it. Okay, it's only here in this town in Washington where there's any debate about it. And part of it's about philosophy and whether you're free trade. And part of it's the fact that the multinational companies have a vested interest in the status quo, as I mentioned before. But on the tariffs, and I think this is a very good point, that Trump had these tariffs put into place. They were very controversial. I know you supported them. I supported them because I was like, look, we need to do something. At least this gives us some leverage while we figure out that something. But even today, there's folks that are saying, well, this inflation, the tariffs are causing it. And the truth is the tariffs were in place for, 2 years before any of this inflation started. They didn't cause it. Right. That's not the reason why we have inflation at all. And so what all these big companies like Walmart, Amazon, all the large multinational manufacturers are hoping that they can fool the Biden administration or Congress into saying, well, these tariffs have got to go because we'll be able to lower prices for consumers. There's absolutely no evidence that they would do that if tariffs were cut back, that all of a sudden they'd issue dramatic price drops. They'd pocket. They would pocket any sort of savings that they made.
No, for me, the inflation is based on a bunch of, there are a bunch of reasons that we're having the kind of inflation we have right now. Our supply chain issues are part of that. The fact that there's a more limited supply because China shuts things down. That's where our manufactured stuff comes from. If there isn't enough of it here, the prices are going to go up. And the other part of it is good old-fashioned American capitalistic opportunism. There's a good excuse to raise prices and fatten the bottom line. Look, if we had inflation and corporate America was crying that they weren't making profits, you go, okay, there might be something, but they've never been doing better. By the Trumpian world of the economy doing well, we should be dancing in the streets because Wall Street is happy and joy and doing backflips while the rest of us are still struggling.
Yeah, that's right. And when you get into what's causing inflation or looking at, foodstuffs, have gone up a little bit. And part of that is just a little bit of supply constraints just because people get sick and it ripples through the supply chain. Fuel, none of that comes from China. We don't get any energy from China. But that's been that has partially to do with OPEC and their policies. Housing starts. There's actually very little building material that comes from China as well. And that's because people are investing in their homes rather than going on vacations. It's as simple as that. So, and this is the product of the pandemic and not any sort of Biden policy at all. But the last thing you want to do is to give away to China the leverage that we have through the tariffs to try to put increased pressure on them. Yeah. And I think Biden's going to try to find other avenues to do that too. Like he's going to be talking to the Japanese prime minister on Friday to enlist another ally in this effort. He's tried to enlist Europe in this and our North American partners as well. But it's going to take a community of nations to talk to the leadership in Beijing and say, look, the status quo is unacceptable.
Is there
your
really talking?
economic policies are harming all of us collectively.
Yeah. But is there really talking to Beijing? I mean, honestly and truthfully, is there really any talking anymore? I mean, at a certain point, you got to go, we've been talking and talking and talking. They're not listening. And they make agreements and they never follow through on them. They're going to tell us what we want to hear, and they're going to do whatever the hell they damn well please anyway, which is dominate manufacturing and take over the next generation of jobs, which the only thing I think they understand is some kind of power and some kind of consequence where we start reclaiming our manufacturing. That's all I can come up with. Maybe you've got another thought.
No, you are absolutely correct about that. And I am skeptical that we could reach a comprehensive deal with China that deals with the core issues that I mentioned, the state ownership, the subsidies, the labor exploitation, because that's the whole model their economy is built on, Rick. So the idea that they would somehow be able to transform that even within a generation is just a fool's errand. So what we need to do is to insulate ourselves from the impact that those policies have. That means to become more resilient, to be more self-sufficient, to have a better set of arrangements with our allies that are mutually beneficial, but also to hold China to account. And so instead of having Intel, like, for instance, apologize to China for saying, we were going to any of our supply chain to be in the Uyghur area because of the genocide, but we're sorry we mentioned that. Or John Cena, Mr. Tough Guy, apologizing in Mandarin for suggesting that Taiwan is a country for speaking the truth. That is what we got to stop. And we have to assert our own rights and stand up and say, we won't put up with genocide. We won't put up with human rights violations. We won't put up with exploited labor. So, and to say to our companies like Apple and others, there will be a consequence for you operating in China, because right now there's really none.
Because China's doing it. I mean, right now, I was just reading a story a little bit ago that evidently China has blocked all of the Disney Marvel movies because it may give people the impression that they have choices in their government. And we can't have that, because ultimately they're still a communist government.
Yeah, they are. And so, they're very selective about what they want in, and they expect absolute obedience from these companies. And no one's been more obedient than Disney. So the fact that they're even pressing Disney a little bit indicates what their intentions are. Yeah, so we need to wake up, and corporate America in particular has to stop thinking it's like the hot stove. Like when you're younger, Rick, I don't know about you, but you'd get into relationships where you were just like, oh, but it'll be different this time, or I'm looking past this flaw that is so obvious to everybody else. That's who we are right now, and we have to open our eyes and get real.
There you go, Scott. I appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, my friend. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Rick. Keep up the great work. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Our good friend Scott Paul. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1943. On this day, marking the death of the first woman general organizer appointed by the American Federation of Labor. Mary Kinney O'Sullivan was born the only child of working-class Irish immigrants in Hannibal, Missouri. She worked at a printing and binding factory in Missouri, and then moved to Chicago for work in the city's binderies. She helped organize the Chicago Women's Bindery Workers Union. Mary Kinney O'Sullivan became friends with Settlement House social worker Jane Addams. The newly formed bindery union held their meetings at Addams' Hull House. O'Sullivan joined another champion for working people, Florence Kelly, on her investigation of sweatshops and slums in Chicago. O'Sullivan was one of a group of women who rose to national prominence as organizers for progressive change. Her work caught the attention of Samuel Gompers, president of the AFL. Gompers named O'Sullivan the AFL's first female organizer in 1892. In 1893, O'Sullivan was one of the main speakers, along with Florence Kelly, at a rally organized by Hull House and the Chicago Trades and Labor Assembly. 1,000 people heard her speak that day. The purpose of the rally was to demand inspections of the conditions in the city's factories. Later that year, the Illinois governor signed the State Factory Inspection Act. The next year, O'Sullivan married John O'Sullivan, the labor editor of the Boston Globe. She relocated to the East Coast, where she continued to fight for workers' rights. And thus we remember Mary Kenny O'Sullivan, who was one of the leading voices of her time for improving workplace safety in Chicago and throughout the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
One 416 Rick 1-866-416-7425. If you've got a thought, question, comment, something on your mind, something you want to chime in about. You look at the China thing and the fact that China has blocked all 4 of the Marvel movies just shows that the power that they're willing to wield while holding their ideology in very, very violent terms. And these are our trading partners. And again, you go, oh, we're going to make a deal. And look, I go back to the Trump years, and I took a lot of flack from people who were the anti-Trump crowd, of which I was against the vast majority of what Trump did. But on the trade front, this is where the blind squirrel found a nut. I was with him on, hey, let's bring manufacturing back. Did he do it? No. In fact, he actually lost factories. He made threats. He did all kinds of stuff. Didn't actually had that really great press conference and that great photo op in Wisconsin where the Foxconn was going to bring in, 13,000 jobs. And I guess it's somewhere around 200 right now. But there was this great PR stuff, but nothing actually done. And I'm listening to conservatives right now going, Joe Biden hasn't done anything. And I go, well, he hasn't done anything but create more jobs than any president in the first year of a presidency ever. So he doesn't know how to create jobs. I actually read that. He doesn't know how to create jobs. I go, well, maybe not. And I generally don't give presidents credit for creating jobs anyway. But if we're going on the matrix of how many jobs were being created, if we're going on that of how many jobs were created, this administration done it, lots of it. Did I say matrix? I meant metrics. It was what it was. But I look at this and it's infuriating. Absolutely just infuriating. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Supreme Court, our Supreme Court. There was an emergency request to block the federal mask mandate for air travel. They had to hurry up and get it through. And it went to Neil Gorsuch, because Neil Gorsuch handles several of the western states where this emanated from, and took it before the other justices, and they denied the request without comment or noted dissent, just no. So the mask mandate for air travel, it most certainly does stay in place, which I'm sure is very disappointing for the folks who moved forward on it. But in their defense, and good for them, they picked the right place to do it and the right justice to bring it. Neil Gorsuch, evidently an anti-masker himself. The story came out today that he refuses to wear a mask while in person during court proceedings and the job that the Supreme Court does. Knowing that Sonia Sotomayor has a lot of problems with diabetes and other severe health concerns that would make her, well, if she got COVID, it'd probably be the end of her. She has some of the comorbidities that it would just probably wipe her out. But you got Gorsuch there going, well, I'm not. I have my freedoms. And you go, is that, could you go that would be considered some type of attempted murder charge on some level? No, of course not. Now, I wonder, because the Chief Justice has requested, and this is where you go, requested, could you not be a little more forceful than request that, any of the in-person stuff, people wear masks? Gorsuch is, flipping the thumb. And this is one of those things where I go back to that decency thing. I understand. There's a part of me that goes, I understand. Going into a supermarket full of people you don't know, the heck with these people. I don't care about them. Probably never going to see them again anyway. Without knowing that there are probably other people just like you who would be willing to breathe on you and get you sick and all that. But, I digress. But going into a room full of people that you work intimately with and saying, I don't care about your health. That's the message that it sends. I don't care about you. I don't care whether you live or breathe or die. If I'm inconvenienced in any way, shape, or form, doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter if you live or die. That is a remarkable statement from somebody who, I would argue on a certain level, should be models of citizenry. To use the role model thing, should be kind of role models for society. These are the people who decide the laws. These are the people on the high court. And to not have an ounce of common decency for someone you're sitting freaking next to? Wow. I'll tell you, I am quite amazed. Some good news on the Supreme Court, potentially. According to Jeffrey Toobin over at CNN, I guess he was not on Zoom. According to the Toobin, there could be a Supreme Court retirement fairly soon. And I think everybody's looking at Stephen Breyer. He's getting up in age, way up. And I think Breyer's kind of looking at the electoral calendar like the rest of us, especially now that you've seen two more Democrats in the House who aren't going to be seeking re-election, Jerry McInerney of California and Jim Langevin of Rhode Island. They're not going to be running. That means there are 28 House Democrats who have decided not to run for re-election. That's telling me the handwriting's on the wall. They know the slaughter is coming because they're probably not raising enough money to be able to compete, because I think this is one of those self-fulfilling prophecy moments. But you got to be looking, if you're Breyer, going, now's the time to get out. If you're going to get somebody who's somewhat moderate to a little bit more liberal-minded, someone who's not freaking crazy, because understand, I'm telling you right now, if Breyer doesn't go now, and he waits until Republicans take control of the House and Senate, and something happens to him, they will not be replacing him until Trump, DeSantis, somebody just as crazy, if not worse than either one of them, Josh Hawley, until the next authoritarian ruler sits in the Oval Office. And then they'll race through the list of crazy. And then they're going to do everything that Democrats are talking about doing right now. The filibuster will go the wayside when they need to pass something. They will pack the courts if they need to. They will do what they need to do because they understand the use of power. They understand getting things done, that people need. You got to get things done. And this is kind of the weird spot that we're in. Democrats just not wielding the power well. And it comes back to, the Manchin, more to Joe Manchin. I mean, like I said earlier today, Schumer had come out and said, hey, look, let's reinstate the talking filibuster, which I have been in favor of from the beginning. Even before this, for years I've been saying, we need to go back to the talking filibuster. This idea where the Senate is the place where every bit of progress for working class America goes to die has to stop. And in fact, the lazy filibuster of we don't even get to know who it is because they did it from their office and they don't bother telling anybody because everyone just goes, oh, I guess someone filibustered. We don't have to do anything is ridiculous. I'm a working class guy. Put in the work. You want to stop something? You want to filibuster? You get your, onto that floor, and you tell me why. Put in the work. And if you got to stand there 24, 36, 48 hours to do it, you got to stand there a week. You got to bring in dancers and midgets with grinders, and you got to bring in, showgirl, whatever. You got to bring in something. You got to bring in the Harlem Globetrotters. Hold the floor. Hold the floor. And what this means is nothing else can pass. And this way, as society, we then go, okay, this is important. Let's all now pay attention to this. Let's all now be involved in why this piece of legislation cannot pass and have an open, honest debate about it. This is my frustration. Because, if we don't get something done on the voting rights, as we talked about earlier with Greg Palast, the steel's already in. They've already figured it out. They've gamed it out. They've already prepared the American public for it. The one question I didn't get to ask him is how long, because my mind is, how long has this arrow been in the quiver? How long have they been thinking about this? Was this something that Trump and company dreamt up in 2015? Is this something that they believed would fly back then? And the answer was no, because the conditions weren't right yet. The perfect storm still wasn't here yet, because Democrats still controlled the House, but Republicans controlled the vote in the House. So if you could have gotten a couple of secretaries of state to come on board, if you could have gotten that initial push, you could have gotten Pence to say, no, I'm not going to certify it. It's entirely possible it could have worked. And the American people would have been, blindsided by it. And they would have made a constitutional argument, and Fox News, I'm sure, was going to be on board, as when all of the other right-wing media telling us, no, this is what the founders wanted. The popular vote where Joe Biden won by more than 7 million votes, that doesn't count. Who cares what the mass of people wanted? We were never a mass. We were never supposed to vote for president. We feared the people. We were never actually supposed to vote for senators either. The only place where we were allowed to vote was at the people's house, in the House of Representatives, where the passions of the people were allowed to just rage. And then the upper chamber put it down. And when that rage meant progress for the masses, when that outrage meant, time for you and me to get something better opportunities for ourselves, our children, better schools, better health care, better education, all kinds of stuff. Sorry, the upper chamber has a filibuster. And all you got to do is buy off one senator. Oh, I'm sorry, not buy them off. Influence their vote through aggressive lobbying. And that's how they've stopped stuff. All the things that I've cared about throughout my political life, all the things that we didn't get, like strike replacement, the Employee Free Choice Act, labor law reform, health care for people, all that stuff has gone to the Senate to die. Because they can. And this is the frustrating part of where we are. And what do they feed us? They feed us outrage candy. We should be angry at each other, those others. We should slice and dice each other up into categories and subcategories. And I now have people who tell me what they identify as. And I don't care. I believe everyone has the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I don't care how you slice and dice yourself. At the end of the day, working people are working people. Americans are Americans. We should be moving in that direction. We should stop dividing ourselves. And the Republicans are masterful at this. They're masterful at throwing things out to get people to divide up into sides and pit it against each other. The most recent that I saw coming out of Florida, and you gotta love the jingoism and this is going to be beautiful. Evidently, Florida State Representative Joe Grutters, Senator Grutters introduced a piece of legislation that would bar government entities from entering into any agreement with professional sports teams. Here it comes. Wait for it. No agreements with sports, none whatsoever, if they refuse to play the U.S. national anthem. Have you ever been to a sporting event where they didn't? Everybody please rise. Take off your hat for the national. Have you ever gone to one of these sporting events where that hasn't happened? Of course you haven't. But we need the other. There's somebody out there who hasn't done this. And I guarantee you now, because of this, there will be someone dumb enough. And this is what they want. They want a small sports team, roller derby, somewhere in the middle of the Midwest who go, okay, fine, we're not going to play the national anthem just to spot somebody. Or they're going to set it up to go, hey, let's get a name out of this. No sporting event I've ever gone to. Ever. They usually bring somebody's daughter out who can't sing to do that and make me listen to that. But according to this, we won't give you any money. And if you don't comply, there will be financial penalties and you'll get no more future business from the state. There'll be punishment for your defiance. I love that language. Good authoritarian stuff. And again, here is a solution in search of a problem that they want. They want to divide on this. And what's better than, the flag and the national anthem and the jingoism that they claim the January 6th seditionists all in jail at a certain time every day rise and say the Pledge of the Allegiance, which I got to tell you, I think is a steaming pile. But you never know. But we live in a time and in a moment where they are working as hard as they can to slice us and dice us and pit us against one another so that we don't go after who the real problems are. The billionaires who got rich during the pandemic and these politicians who always are trying to keep us at each other's throats. We got to fight back on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Moyers versus Peabody. The case grew out of the Colorado Labor Wars, a series of back-to-back strikes in 1903 and 1904 in the precious metals mines and ore mills. The Colorado National Guard meted out violent assaults, arrests, and deportations against strikers, often on orders from Colorado Governor James Peabody. The state militia routinely rounded up strikers and union leaders, detained them for weeks in bullpens, and ignored their habeas corpus petitions. Western Federation of Miners President Charles Moyer arrived in Telluride during a strike to find these repressive conditions. He signed a poster that read, "Is Colorado in America?" The poster included an image listing the many violations of basic democratic rights on the American flag. Moyer was arrested in March of 1904 for desecration of the American flag on on the poster. He was detained on the grounds of military necessity, even after the courts ordered his release. His case traveled through the state and federal courts until the Supreme Court ruled. They held that the governor and officers of a state National Guard, acting in good faith and under authority of law, may imprison without probable cause a citizen of the United States in times of insurrection and deny that citizen the right of habeas corpus. The ruling radicalized the labor movement. Many concluded there could be no justice through the court system. A later case successfully challenged the ruling on the basis that the claims of insurrection were subject to judicial review. The ruling, however controversial, still stands today and was invoked after 9/11 in the 2004 ruling Hamdi versus Rumsfeld. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this is fun. And look, as we've been talking about for the last couple of days, the fight now in the Republican Party, and this is where the fun begins and where I'm kind of excited for the next couple of months as Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis fight for their position, because Trump clearly wants to maintain the king of the hill of the GOP, and DeSantis is going, no, that's me. I'm going to be the new guy. I'm going to grab the mantle. Well, DeSantis, and look, we've known this, but he's coming out with his police force. He says he's going to have about a budget of nearly $6 million, and they're going to employ 52 investigators, and they're going to go and police the elections. They're going to hold people accountable, except for, well, all the criminals that did all the kind of stuff that we saw in the last election. They're people. And here to share some thoughts on the police force and maybe some of the crimes that went on in the last election, I've asked our good friend Christopher Hahn to come talk with us. Christopher is a syndicated radio host and host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast. You can check out his stuff over at ChristopherHahn.com. Christopher, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So let's jump right in with the first part of this. DeSantis, police force, we're going to secure elections. No more questions in Florida about voter misconduct or fraud. Well, at least not from those people anyway.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought after 2020's election, when he came out and said, see, we do it right here in Florida, I didn't think there were any questions about the election in Florida. I think actually he's looking for a problem that doesn't exist. And because to be a Republican in Donald Trump's America, you need to be extremely ridiculous on election and on voting. You don't want anything to happen. And quite frankly, I don't get it, Rick, because I'm looking at polls right now. It's not looking good for the Democrats in the midterm. I'll be honest with you. I mean, the polls I'm seeing right now are horrible for us coming up in the midterm. You would think that the Republicans would want as many people as they can to vote. It's ridiculous.
And you would think that they would kind of back away and just shut up for a while and not have the pie fight that I'm hoping is coming and that you're seeing brewing between the Trump wing and the growing kind of who's next wing. So that kind of infighting over the next several months could be quite entertaining and open a door for the Democrats to actually, maybe take advantage of that.
The way I see it, 45% of Republicans don't want Donald Trump to run for president in 2024. 45%. So that leaves a wide door open for anyone who gets in there and really makes a name for it, whether it's DeSantis or somebody else. I think DeSantis' problem, he kind of reminds me of Ted Cruz in 2016. He was buttering up to the Donald for so long. And now he's trying to turn on the Donald, and the Donald is very quick to turn on people who turn on him. Ted Cruz, learned that lesson the hard way when he basically accused his father of trying to kill Kennedy and his wife of being ugly.
And now I find it ironic that the Trump supporters were in Dealey Plaza waiting for Kennedy's kid to come back from the dead.
It's amazing.
We're in such a screwy kind of place. I was reading an article.
Wait. Before you move on to the next topic, Wouldn't you think that the people who went to Dealey Plaza and Kennedy didn't show up, don't you think at that point they would start, questioning their life choices and who they believe and move back to like some sort of, normalcy and maybe pick up the New York Times or the Washington Post or even a local newspaper to get their information instead of going on the web and getting it from somebody who's like locked in their mother's basement trying to make friends? It's ridiculous.
No, we're about the same age. I grew up at a time where, there were groups saying, on Tuesday, the end of the world's coming. And then they would re-amend that because they knew the end of the world's coming. But maybe I got the date wrong. Maybe it's 6 weeks from now. Maybe it's 5 years from now.
There's a religion that's been around for over 100 years that started out on a doomsday cult, the Seventh-Day Adventists. They were saying that the world was going to end on a certain date, and then the world didn't end, and their founder died, and they moved on to something else, some other scam. It's ridiculous.
Which is why I
reassess.
Which is why I put the whole cute kookery, all those folks, all of the MAGA hat wearers, I put them into that death cult kind of category. It's a cult. It's not a political movement. It's not a party. It's a cult because you're going to believe anything no matter what.
Even when they
might as well get rid of the crazy stuff.
Even when they are shown to be ridiculous with their own eyes. They go to Dealey Plaza, no Kennedy.
I guess they were waiting for this past weekend when they had the little shindig in Arizona, that they were waiting for Prince and Michael Jackson, and evidently there were a bunch of dead performers going to come back along with JFK Jr. I didn't see the headline that happened, but they were expecting it.
I would have loved to see Prince again. He puts on a great show, but I don't know that he'd want to share a stage with the Donald. I don't know that the Donald will let him. A guy like Prince who's going to really just rock out the place and upstage the Donald, I don't think he'd enjoy that too much.
But for me, the JFK Jr. thing is kind of interesting in that if you're looking at this, you're going, let me get this straight. You think JFK Jr.'s politics would align with Trump's politics and that they could coexist? You really believe that? Because then it just shows me that you don't know anything about politics.
Remember, these people don't really read, right? They could just pick up an old edition of George, the magazine, and they'll know his politics don't align with Donald Trump. I mean, the guy was more liberal than his dad by a mile.
Yeah, no, just crazy stuff. But, I'm looking at DeSantis, though, and DeSantis is trying. I don't find him as dangerous as someone like Josh Hawley. I think he's more easily dismissed. But this idea of a police force, of another kind of police force, going and targeting specific things, that's kind of frightening to me. And giving a governor like DeSantis that kind of power to kind of, threaten, intimidate, do whatever they've got to do, especially as you're looking around the country as Republican legislators are in the process of putting massive roadblocks in front of people being able to vote. I mean, all this for me comes back to, the sanctity of the ballot box and the future of the country and this wonderful experiment of self-rule that we've been able to live under pretty much coming to an end.
I think his problem is in Florida, it's really hard to change the election law because they did a whole revamp of their election process after the 2000 debacle. So he's trying to do something to keep up with the Kristi Noems of the world, or these places where the legislature could just write a blank check for the governor to do whatever they want with elections. It's kind of hard to do that in Florida. You're not going to take away early voting. You're not going to take away the various other absentee methods, which, by the way, a lot of Republicans in Florida use, particularly older Republicans use that. So he's got a real problem keeping up with the Joneses in the Republican Party and trying to be the worst person in America on elections. So what is he going to do? I don't know. Let me have the shock troops that are going to go out there and investigate if any extra people of color have voted. Oh, God forbid somebody who's not a Republican shows up for the first time. We better find out what that guy's all about.
Yeah, and we'll hunt them down and we'll run them through the ringer just so that they know we're watching, in the hopes that they'll eventually not vote and give up.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about more than anything. You're not going to find many people who are double voting, or we found a couple here in Pennsylvania, both Trump voters, and that seems to be what has happened over the last couple of election cycles. But if we're really going to go after the criminals, how come? And I've asked this to a number of people. The people who forged the certificates from Arizona, from Nevada, from Wisconsin, from Georgia, from Michigan, how come those people aren't behind bars? That to me is massive fraud on an enormous
behind
scale.
bars ain't behind bars yet. I want to know who was, printing out those forms and sending them out. And I want that person in jail. And I think that, look, I feel like DOJ is really getting into a groove now with some of these indictments. And I expect more indictments. I know a lot of people were frustrated that it took time. I'm a lawyer. Justice takes time. We don't want a Justice Department that's going to knee jerk to the political base like the one we had under Trump for 4 years. We want a Justice Department that actually is going to go through the process of seeking justice. And I think that's what's happening here. You saw it last week with the indictments of the Oath Keepers. I think you're going to see more indictments of people who are committing these kinds of frauds on our elections. And I think it's going to be shocking where it ends up.
No, I'm hoping you're right. And look, I've always separated the difference between the committee and the hearings that are going on and the slow pace of that and what has to happen with the Department of Justice. Those are two very different things. The political on one side has to do what it has to do.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you have to do the right thing come the Department of Justice. But I'm looking at this when these certificates were first submitted to the National Archive. That moment, they knew they had two certificates. One is authentic, one is not. Why was not someone knocking on someone's door the next day going, "This is a crime, you're going to jail"?
Oh, we don't know that people didn't have their doors knocked on, Rick. Get ready. I think people's doors have been knocked on, and I believe that somebody will be held accountable for it. Whether or not this is a jailable offense, I don't know, but I think there needs to be some sort of accountability here.
Okay, that's a good point. You're a lawyer. How is it not a crime to say that we've decided that we're going to put forth these alternate delegates, and we're going to pass this off as somewhat official by putting seals on it and this kind? How is that not a crime?
The minute they put it in the mail, it was mail fraud. So there is, the postal inspector has a lot of power too. And I should refer you to a movie that's out right now I think it's called Queen Bees or something like that. It's with Kristen Bell, where they're like committing mail fraud with coupons. It's a good flick. If you're stuck in a house like everybody in this country, good thing to watch. But it really is mail fraud. And ultimately, these people can be held accountable that way as well. Doesn't matter how you get them, Rick.
Al Capone was
tax fraud.
Al Capone was thrown in jail for income tax evasion.
I want accountability. And again, I don't know that people spend years in prison for this, but there is some accountability that needs to be had here. And they did commit mail fraud, and they did try to defraud the United States.
So if that doesn't happen, if we don't have people who are spending years in jail over this, because I think what happened on January 6th and all of the organizing that went around in this coup attempt is a pretty big freaking deal.
Yeah.
I think this is a pretty enormous deal that there was coordination. 5 states submitted this. It wasn't like one guy said, "Hey, I got an idea." You had 5 states. They almost all look identical. There looks like there was coordination. There's the Eastman memo.
Yeah.
There's the PowerPoint. There's all of the texts and stuff that who knows how many people were read in on this stuff. This seems like, and again, I am not a lawyer. That's you. This seems like a conspiracy.
It is a conspiracy. And it is going to come back on somebody in the Trump campaign, if not Trump himself. Somebody told them to do this. Somebody came up with that form and sent it around the country because it's the same form. It's too much of a coincidence for anybody to believe that all these people had the same idea at the same time. So somebody's going to be held accountable for this. I can't wait. We're going to find out. I bet you it's going to be a name brand person too. It's a Steve Bannon or a Mike Flynn, Roger Stone. Somebody did this. It could be Eastman. It could be Mark Meadows. And we're going to find out.
That is the hope, and hope it's soon. Now, today, the January 6th committee is subpoenaed the Trump lawyers, Giuliani and Sidney Powell. Is this possible since there's that attorney-client privilege? You're the attorney. How much of that plays into this?
Well, attorney-client privilege is a major privilege, but it is pierced when there is the commission of a crime, frankly. And if you are assisting your client in committing a crime, which Rudy Giuliani appears to me like he was, I mean, I think, insurrection is a pretty big deal. I don't think the attorney-client privilege holds up for him. And also, quite frankly, was Rudy Giuliani being compensated for his time as an attorney? You can't just say I'm your attorney. There needs to be a retainer and compensation. I don't recall Rudy Giuliani being paid. I recall him asking to be paid, but I'd like to see his retainer agreement with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'd like to see anyone's retainer agreement with Donald Trump. The thing we've learned from Trump is he doesn't often pay his bills. So there is that. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Christopher Hahn. Christopher is a syndicated radio host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast. You can find that at ChristopherHahn.com. We'll get links out on social media. Talking about people going to jail, I wanted to get your thoughts on the possibility of the Matt Gaetz indictment watch, which I have friends who are starting a countdown since the ex-girlfriend has now been granted immunity. Florida, new election crime people, maybe take that money and instead of putting it towards the election crime, maybe actual crimes like the ones that are alleged for Matt Gaetz. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, this has been coming down for a long time, this Matt Gaetz indictment. Where is it? It seems to me, 6 months ago, there was a pretty clear case that this guy was involved with that county treasurer, I think he was, who copped a plea and who supposedly was turning state's evidence on Matt Gaetz. Where's the indictment? Now, I get it. You're going to indict a sitting congressman, especially a high-profile one like Matt Gaetz. You're going to cross your T's and dot your I's, and that takes some time. But I will believe it when I see it. And seeing his girlfriend, testify and be granted immunity, that helps, I think, create it. But I don't want to hold out hope. I know, I'm not, first of all, I never like to see anybody go to jail. It's not my thing. Rick, I'm a lawyer. I worked as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney in my career. I always felt for people going to jail, no matter how bad a person they were. And I think Matt Gaetz is one of the worst people in this country in a lot of ways. But that said, justice is important. Accountability is important. If this guy was transferring teenage girls across state line for sex, he must be held accountable. The question is, how much evidence do they have? And it's a pretty high standard if you're going to bring down a member of Congress.
Yeah, I'm with you on the jail thing, but I do like to see criminals held accountable.
So do I. I want everybody held accountable.
If I'm a judge, I wouldn't mind an alternative sentence for someone like this.
Well, for this guy, I don't want an alternative sentence. If he's bringing girls across state, 17-year-old girls. I have a 15-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
That's not much younger. He's bringing 17-year-old girls across state lines for the purposes of having sex and doing drugs with them. Put him in jail for that.
Yeah, no. As the father of two teenage daughters, I can think of a better alternative sentence.
Yeah, give him to me for 5 minutes if I'm his father, right? Yeah. Give him to the father for 10 minutes. All is forgiven at the end of it. If you survive, 10 minutes, which you won't.
And that is the key. Last question real quick I got for you on the voting rights thing we didn't get to, but are we going to get anything done on voting rights? I know Kirsten Sinema says she's all in support, but doesn't seem willing to do anything to actually move on that support. Does anything happen?
They keep talking about making the filibuster a talking filibuster. If that happens, there's a chance. But I do think that we will get something done, probably not everything we want. I would like to see some changes to the Electoral Count Act, where the vice president's role is clearly defined and where the states, if they are going to overturn the result of an election, have to go through some sort of judicial process all the way up to the Supreme Court before they are able to do that.
There you go.
And if we put that stuff together, I think that would be a victory.
Good stuff. I'm from the beginning. I said talking filibuster. That's where I want to go. It's where we should. Christopher, I appreciate the time, man. Always good talking with you.
Anytime, Rick.
Good stuff. Christopher Hahn. Make sure you check out his podcast, the Aggressive Progressive Podcast. ChristopherHahn.com. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Have you ever worn a union button or T-shirt to work? On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. Members of the Australian Tramways Association in Brisbane, Queensland, decided to put on their union badges at work. The men operated and maintained the city's public transport system. For months before the action, their manager, an American named Joseph Stillman Badger, had banned wearing the badges. He wanted to thwart the union from growing in numbers. Before noon that day, the workers gathered together and donned their union badges by affixing them to their watch chains. And for that, they were promptly suspended from their jobs. They were told they could return to work if they took off the badges. The workers refused. That night, 10,000 people gathered in the city's market square in a rally to support the workers. The next day, 25,000 workers walked off the job and marched through the streets. A general strike was called for January 30th. 43 unions supported the strike. The police violently attempted to disband the strikers on February 2nd, a day known in Australia as Black Friday. Perhaps the most remembered event in the strike occurred when the famous feminist Emma Miller stuck her hat pin into the rump of the police chief's horse. The horse reared and sent him tumbling to the ground. The strike wore on for 5 weeks before it faded. At the end of February, the tramway employees were officially granted the right to wear their badges. But the company refused to hire back striking workers. The events at Brisbane were an important stand for free speech and the right to form a union. A question for today is, how far would you be willing to go to show your union pride? Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Don't forget, download the podcast. If you do nothing else, grab the podcast, share it with your friends, neighbors, coworkers. That is how we get the word around. It's the beginning of the organizing process. Spread the word. Look, I've been talking for a long time how we save democracy in this country, and it seems like we can't agree on what category we've put ourselves into. And my kids all the time, my friend identifies this or identifies as this. For me, the way forward is for Americans to identify as Americans, but more importantly, how about we identify as workers first? And we organize on hey, we can agree on that we're all workers and we should make our work lives better. For me, that's a start. And when I saw this piece over at The Nation, how workers can win in 2022, I said, this is a place where we should begin to have this conversation. That's why I've asked Jane McElevey to come talk with us. Jane's an organizer, author, scholar, strike correspondent for The Nation. She's the one who wrote the piece, also senior policy fellow over at the University of California at Berkeley's Labor Center. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
I am delighted to be on your show. Thanks.
You have an awful long, a lot of stuff going on there. You've written 3 different books on organizing. You're kind of the expert on this. For me, this idea of if we're all going to be involved in this identity stuff, how about we identify as workers and we make our work lives better and we bring democracy to the workplace and empowerment there first, and maybe that spreads.
Yeah, that's a great opening question to ask, because of course we are going to agree on that in a significant way. I think the question of how people identify themselves as sort of individuals is, however people choose to do that, is fine with me. But in terms of a strategy about what it's going to take to actually save this country from the train wreck that we're heading into, we're already in it, frankly. But how we're going to possibly get ourselves out of the train wreck that we're already in. My life experience says the only thing that has ever been able to unify people across race, gender, class, and all the many identities that are out there, there is one overarching identity which unifies us. And that's how we get treated at work. What's the boss doing to us today? And can we actually use the general degradation of conditions in the workplace in this country, going on now for 50 some odd years, as the front by which we build and construct, because I actually think we have to construct it these days, right? Individualism as a culture is so profoundly strong and so driven as a media narrative and a narrative in this country, that the place where we can unify all of our identities is in the workplace as workers, because we share a lot of indignity together when we punch that clock and go to work. The boss don't really care what color we are, what gender we are, all of it. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of issues to deal with when it comes to racism, sexism, all of it, of course. But it's best done once we build enough unity to have some power in the workplace to actually fight back.
No, and as I've said numerous times, I've been a Teamster for over 30 years. All of the societal problems that you see in the media and in our politics have happened in the workplace. And interestingly enough, under our contract and between the union and management, we've figured out how to deal with those problems in a way that everyone can move forward and support their families and thrive under. I said the other day, I remember the first time I came across the transgender issue. We had a guy who went away, came back, he was a woman, and you know what? Had the same job, got the same pay, same benefits. We moved forward. It wasn't the end of society. Like it seems to be in this moment. It seems like when it gets into the political world, it becomes an abstract. But if it's in the workplace, we have this idea that, we can coexist and we can figure out how to move forward without burning the house down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, no question about it. Again, there are a lot of very real issues that workers have of all kinds, but there's a common issue we have, which is that we're getting paid like crap. We're being asked to sacrifice our lives in the workplace. And there is for me, as an organizer and a negotiator, there have been many, many, many campaigns. Probably every campaign I've ever been involved in, the boss is going to weaponize race and gender or transgender or all of it, right? The employer is going to weaponize that when they're trying to do union busting and divide and conquer the workers. So as a trade union organizer, part of what I love about the work, and there are issues in our union movement, as we know, but what I love about the work is that it is the place where we can break down some of these issues and actually figure out that we have commonality. And then we can move forward, by the way, in our contract campaigns and make real progress on some of those sub-issues, like, is the boss being racist in their pay scale? Is the boss being sexist in their pay scale? Are they treating a transgender person different? But we can't solve those issues unless and until we unify, build power, and get to what I call super majority worker organization, workplace by workplace in this country. And when we do that, Rick, as you know, I think we actually win.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah, but part of what you're raising, and I see a lot of it around right now with the sort of identity stuff, is I think it's like the culmination, or I hope it's the culmination of like the 50-year war that some people use big words for, and I don't care about big words, but like neoliberalism. Like, what does that really mean? What it really means, basically, is that the employers figured out how to drive everything away from the idea that collective is good and to really jam the idea that individualism and individuals is the way to go. And so if you drive this message that the individual is supreme and the collective is bad, then what you get are hundreds of millions of people sitting around thinking about their individual selves, as opposed to our job in the trade union movement, which is to get everyone thinking about, but ain't no one winning when you're a working person if you're standing alone talking about your individual issues. The only way working people contend for power in this country is when we band together and build supermajority power and have the kind of power that's going to force the employer class to give workers what the hell they want. Yeah. And that's been my life for going on almost 30 years. I'm getting old. And it's so amazing to me to watch a boss try and use and weaponize race, gender, immigration, right, as a subset of ethnicity and race. And then good organizing and having really good conversations with workers and confronting those issues in the workplace, doing what we call inoculation in campaigns. Like, we say to the workers, if you're good, we say to the workers long before the boss does it, first thing the boss is going to do is divide black, white, black from Latino, women from men, white from, just go right down the line. Who speaks English first language? Who doesn't speak English first language? Every hospital campaign I ran, if it was out west where it's Filipinas are heavy in the hospitals versus the East Coast where it's more of a Caribbean, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, et cetera, base to the work. Like, I've watched them use every one of those weapons. And what we do is we say to the workers up front, hey, guess what's going to happen in this campaign? The employer is going to come right at us and try and divide you. Why do you think the boss is going to do that in this campaign? What's the boss afraid of when all of us actually start agreeing on what needs to happen in the workplace, right? We're going to win. And that's why the boss is going to do this. And we kind of need that being done nationally right now. And it's not really happening in the way that we need it to be happening right now. But that is the way forward. And I think, one last quick thought on this is that I hate to do this, but we need to do it. We need to start thinking about this time next year. So imagine, Rick, you and I are having a conversation and it's January and it's 2023. I'm pretty terrified of what it's going to look like at this particular moment, right? And then project forward to 2024, 2025. And, so I think if we're serious, that's what I try and say in the Nation article. If we are looking not with rose-colored glasses, the opposite, if we are looking stone cold reality here, we got a Supreme Court that's going to rule against us for the rest of my life, that's for sure. However long my life is, whether it's long or short, we got a court we're stuck with. And when people say, oh, we're going to change the court, like we can't even win a $15 minimum hour wage. We're not going to change the court, right? So we've got a very bad Supreme Court and we're locked into it for a while, partly because of our own mistakes, right? In the last, 10 years or so. But then on top of that, we're losing the House or the Senate or both. I think that's real. I think most everyone thinks that's real with this. Right. So, and we're going to lose a whole lot of state houses. And we've got some states that are already egregious state houses. So if you look at that power structure analysis and you start to think about, given the power structure analysis as it exists and as it's about to become, what are the choices that ordinary people in this country have to demand power and justice and right size this country? It strikes in the workplace. That's it.
Which is why we're seeing the Great Resignation happening, and why we're seeing so many work actions across the country and very visible public ones. And look, all those 4.5 million people who have left jobs, if they had the kind of union density that we would like to see and that we've seen in the past, those wouldn't be people resigning from jobs. Those would be people walking on picket lines.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And part of what I say in that article is, look, what would be way more effective than the Great Resignation, frankly, would be a whole lot. If even a fraction of the workers who are quitting decided to do what the Starbucks workers did up in Buffalo or the student researchers did in a bunch of campuses and just say, like, yeah, we're not quitting. We're actually going to get together and form a union and fix this place. That would have way more lasting positive impact on our society and our country than just quitting and walking off the job. Now, I get that frustration having quit. I remember I went running out of a diner, one of my first jobs as a waitress when I was young, like literally running out of a diner and never coming back because the cook was chasing me with a meat cleaver, which, happens, by the way, when you work in a Greek diner in New York City. So I have myself run out of someplace and quit on the spot, you know what I mean? Just to like save my life at that moment. But I would say that is not the way that we're going to build power and change this country. And the only way we're going to do it is when people start to realize that we need way more attention in the economic arena. In fact, it's going to be our only option soon. As the rest of the political spaces are closing down on us, we are going to have to get as good as we were in the 1930s and 40s and early 50s at building the kind of cross race, cross gender, cross everything, class-based unity in the workplace to actually try and stop things that could be far worse that are coming down the pike in this country.
No,
and I have a little insight into that because I've been doing a ton of work in Germany for the last couple of years, where I got to tell you, the prospects of, fascism have become even way more real to me because I'm watching the employer class in Germany dangerously twist and make some of the same mistakes that the employer class has here, and they're walking us right into a hot mess. So it's not funny at this point. It's super dangerous.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Jane McElevey, organizer, author, scholar. She's got a book out, A Collective Bargain, Unions Organizing and the Fight for Democracy, one of her 3. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. I've argued for a while, we're reliving the 1880s, 1890s, the Jay Gould era of I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. Only now they don't have to pay it. We're at each other's throats sufficiently over just about everything. We're at a moment right now where I think the temperature of the average person is way up, and the want and almost the need for conflict is there. Is there a possibility of taking that through some kind of leadership and directing that kind of anger in a better direction? And I look to the labor movement, and Stephen Greenhouse has an article out on this, that he doesn't seem to think that the national leadership of the unions are taking advantage of this moment. I'm curious, one, do you think that they are taking advantage of this moment? Could there be more? And is there a way to funnel this anger in the right direction and say, look, which side of this equation are you on? Are you on the side that can, pay half of us to kill each other? Or are you on the side being killed? I'm curious your thought.
Yeah. I definitely say in probably all three of my books, and certainly in that Nation article, look, the truth is the national leadership missed the boat last year. They just missed the boat. And I think where we have to look, I think the difference is where I'm looking is at the rank and file to actually start demanding and making the kind of changes that need to happen in some of our unions. And we're seeing it, right? In your own union, we saw a leadership change in the recent elections. In my union, which is the United Auto Workers, interestingly, right, in the University of California system, we saw a huge rank and file pushback in December to change the way national leadership is going to be selected in the future. And then most importantly, in the John Deere picket lines, right? Like we saw the workers at John Deere say, that contract that you negotiated and you're recommending to us is not satisfactory to us, and we're voting it down. So that was rank and file workers taking a stand to hold their leadership accountable to we got to win more, folks, right? So I definitely think I'm astounded. I feel like for 25 or 30 years now, every crisis that comes along, I think to myself, okay, this is the moment when our national leadership is going to do what it needs to do in terms of the national trade union movement. And every one of those crises comes and goes, and we ain't. So as I have aged with and in the labor movement, it becomes increasingly clear to me that the change is definitely coming from below. We've seen it with the teachers unions, right? There's a huge groundswell of support from the base that, we can really credit the Chicago teachers 2012 strike with reviving the concept of supermajority strikes in this country. We saw it with the LA teachers, West Virginia. And then the John Deere, the almost IATSE, which I think we'll see an IATSE fight in their next contract. So I think the national leadership has been failing, a lot of us. And I think that the leadership we have to look at is the dispersed, brilliant leadership, because there are, you've had them on and you know them. I can name dozens and dozens of frankly brilliant local union leaders right now who are out there doing incredible work. And so the more of them that there are, the more of them that we lift up and support, the better the chances that we're going to have change at the national union leadership in terms of the work that we're doing. But yeah, there's too much taking orders from the White House versus us giving orders to the White House in my
No, and this is where I've said for a very long time, it's time for labor to use their money in a much better way, get away from politicians, stop spending on those election cycles, and put organizers on the ground and people on the ground and make this more people-centric. But Jane, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Great stuff. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Love to do it. Thanks for the show, Rick.
Thanks so much, Jane McElevey. Make sure you check out her most recent book, A Collective Bargain, Unions and Organizing and the Fight for Democracy. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Also, check out her other books, Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, and as well as No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age. Again, we will get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, anything on your mind. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Be sure to share your stories with us. We do love that. And if you missed any of today's program, the podcast, grab the podcast, take the program on the go wherever you go. But again, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith